Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This week on the show, we want to talk about personal growth. Now, we weave in personal growth messages in everything we talk about here at Personality Hacker because we think that personality types and the other models and maps that we talk about, mental technologies, emotional technologies, social technologies, they all, we think, feed into a great access for personal growth. We think that you can grow yourself by using a lot of these tools as access points.
But I think we want to talk about personal growth a little bit differently this week. And it's not about doing it. It's about when it's okay to not be doing it. Because what can happen is that in our search for meaning as humans, we have a tendency to find something that makes sense, a principle that helps us organize our world, and we double down on it, and then we use it indiscriminately in all contexts.
Yeah.
And I think personal development and personal growth can become one of those. I think we sometimes have a tendency to religionize it. And we might have actually talked about this in previous podcasts. I'm not sure. I don't think we've ever done a full podcast on it. But we wanted to talk about when it's okay to stop looking for problems.
Yeah. You know, one thing, as we do this, the word woke came to my mind because I hear people throwing this around a lot. And I've always conflated personal growth with woke. Like if somebody says they're woke, like I'm woke, AF. I'm always like, oh, they're saying they're really into growth and like working on themselves and bettering themselves. And I'm sure that if I challenged a person that said they were woke, they would probably say that, right? They would probably say, that's exactly what I mean by being woke.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think in the modern social context, I think it's more like you see society for what it is and you see all the problems in society. And you're not just, I mean, like, I would imagine it comes from concepts like the Matrix, where you've taken the red pill and you've woken up from the Matrix and now you can take a meta perspective on society.
Well, and then I think I can see myself conflating that with growth, personal growth. And I'm sure other people do that as well. Just because you can see it doesn't mean you're working on it. Let's put it that way. Like just because I can see problems with society doesn't mean I'm working on myself in order to contribute to the positive endgame of that viewpoint.
Yeah, I think when people say somebody is woke AF, I think that they are more talking about having unplugged, quote unquote, from the Matrix. But I think this goes back, regardless of whether or not you're talking about it on a societal macro level or on an individual personal growth micro level. I think this goes back to a podcast we did a million years ago, which is, are you out of Plato's Allegory of the cave? Like, is anybody actually woke, right? Do we actually get out of the cave? Are we just in a different cave once we get out? Like in the Matrix, Neo had powers when he got out of the Matrix and he was in Zion or in the real, and he ended up having powers there too. And was that yet another Matrix that he was in?
Yeah. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is because we're talking about actually personal growth, the hard grind of making changes in your life that shift how you see things that might be very difficult for you to shift. That's different than having an awareness of something. Like awareness isn't the same thing. So I think as we're getting ready to talk about, when do you know it's cool to like chill back from this driving forward and personally growing all the time, this constant striving, it's important to make a distinction between what that looks like and what just straight awareness looks like. Because I don't believe those things are the same.
Absolutely. Well, and what a great way of saying that. Just having awareness isn't necessarily the same thing as doing the work of personal growth and development. But if you identify yourself as somebody who sees all this stuff, regardless of whether or not it's in a societal context and seeing all the problems of the world, so to speak, or whether or not it's in a personal context and you see all the problems within yourself, there are moments in which it's okay to chill for a second because the problems will always be there. You get out of the Matrix and you're out of the pan and into the flame, right? Like you're in the next Matrix. So honestly, the problems are not going anywhere, as in like as a gestalt. Like you're never going to be your perfected self and society will never be a perfect utopia. Not for long anyway. And so the question becomes, when is it appropriate to stop looking for problems to work on yourself? And is that just being lazy? Are you just being lazy if you take an opportunity to just sort of chill out and maybe, have a moment of celebrating your victories and going, okay, we did a good job there, and I think I'm not going to immediately head into looking for yet another problem to work on. Like, does that mean you're not dedicated to your personal growth process? I think that that's a very valid question. And to be clear, since we're not people who focus that much on society, we focus way more on the personal growth personal growth process. I think that we should keep the conversation to when is it okay to rest in your own growth process.
Yeah, I think that's where I also want to bring that framework down too. I think it's important because I have seen this striving in myself. So from my personal experience, going through being religious, growing up in a spiritual context that was attempting to always do the right thing for God and root out sin and wrongdoing in my life that myself was responsible for, that tension point, that continually rooting out made me want to strive to continually be more and more in alignment with God's ideals for my life. We also live in a country here in the United States and in the West that has kind of this concept of betterment, this manifest destiny of, we're going to be better next year than I was this year. Constant improvement. We almost worship progress in some ways. And I think personal growth isn't any different. Like, it fits right into the U.S.-centric Western matrix of thought that is, we're going to continually improve, root out any inefficiencies or incongruities, and just keep moving forward as a society. And I think we get that as a personal message. We get kind of the spirit of ingenuity and constant betterment and improvement. This idea of the self-made person, self-made man or self-made woman, this self-made person that, pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and really strove. I think Tony Robbins really kind of takes on this characteristic of, like, he talks about how he's completely self-made. He architected himself from scratch and built this up. And that's through constant striving and struggle and work and personal growth. And I buy that, man. I am so in on that train. I love that. That speaks to me like crazy. Like, I get excited about that idea. But then it's like sometimes in life we go through and I stop and I'm like, man, why am I striving so hard? Am I just striving for striving's sake at this point? Is this actually something I have to work on? Have I replaced like this idea of sin? And I've talked about this other podcast with this idea of ego, and I've got to root it out in every possible way. Or have I conflated, my personal growth with just, I can't be settled. I can't rest. I can't just sit and be present. I have to always be striving for the next thing. And so it loses maybe some of its purpose in the first place. I'm doing it for its own sake rather than for actual betterment.
Yeah, when you were talking about that concept of being fully self-made, I thought about the American dream and how, people will come to the United States based on this idea of opportunity. And there's a phrase in the United States, I can't remember who the originator of the quote was, and it's just because it's on the tip of my mind, but I can't remember who it was. But they talked about how America or the United States is filled with a lot of temporarily embarrassed millionaires, which is one of the reasons why we have a tendency to defend the wealthy, because we actually see ourselves as wealthy. We're just not there yet, right? We're just temporarily embarrassed. And there is, just like with everything, there is good and bad that comes from the place that we land. What crosses supports you, and what supports you crosses you. And I think there is a lot of positive and good stuff that comes from wanting to be better and wanting to make progress and wanting to, strive for, or not. I think the word strive is not a good to say that there's a lot of good stuff that comes from it, but there's a lot of good that comes from taking up the mantle of being quote unquote self-made, not in like a self-made millionaire way, but like as a self-made human. Like, you really focused on becoming the best version of yourself. I think there's a lot of good that comes from that. But I think when the strategy eclipses the end game, because we talk a lot about process here as opposed to the result. Like, it's the process that's important, not the result. But we also talk about magnets in the middle of the field, which are the things we ultimately want to accomplish. And over time, we figure out how to calibrate ourselves to that end game. So there's a couple of things that have to be sort of juggled here. The first one is, why are you doing personal growth to begin with? What's your magnet in the middle of the field? What are you constantly calibrating towards? And then on the second piece is, because personal growth and development is pretty much 100% process oriented, to make sure that you're focused on the process and make sure that you're not rushing to that end game, which you can't do, so that you don't trick yourself into believing that you're further along than you actually are. So you have to balance these two concepts. But if you become too process oriented and you lose sight of what the end game is, then now you might be further along than you realized. But because you're so dedicated to the process, then you've let go, you're now incapable of realizing why you started this to begin with. Like you've lost sight of your magnet in the middle of the field. For most people, the magnet in the middle of the field is happiness or self-satisfaction or inner peace and inner calm. Sometimes it's just healing from a trauma that was really distressing to them and was interrupting all sorts of elements of their life. But they wanted to, get past it and become a healed person and not have their trauma define them. And they just got caught up in like, this felt so good and it worked so well that they're just now stuck in this process over and over and over again. So the challenge with personal growth is that you have to be both end game and process oriented at the same time. You can't let go of the fact that you're doing this ultimately for your own personal sense of satisfaction and your sense of inner zen and calm, which of course, obviously also contributes positively to everybody else. That whole concept of be the change you want to see in the world. So personal growth, the end game is to be the change you want to see or to have inner zen or whatever it is. And also at the same time, you have to be fully dedicated and committed to the process of knowing that the way out is through and that it takes time and you've got to collect a bunch of tools and you've got to be really radically honest with yourself and you've got to keep your finger on the pulse of who you are and where you're at and all of that stuff. So it's hard to do. It's kind of a complex thing. We talked so much though in the past about being more focused on the process. I think that it might be good for us to talk a little bit about taking a moment to focus on the end game. Or not the end game, but the magnet in the middle of the field. What is it that you ultimately want to accomplish?
Well, I think it changes for everybody. Like for me, it was to not feel, and we just talked about insecurity. I mean, actually, two things. I wanted to make money and have resource. That was really the avenue I got into personal growth. I would say one of the ways I accessed personal growth was through the book Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Weirdly enough, like bettering myself meant I could have a business and generate resource for my family, the people I care about. And this is like way back when I'm a teenager, right? Like way back, like 17, I think I first read that book. And then the other piece was I wanted a leg up on the competition. Very achievement focused in that I didn't want to feel at a detriment or insecure. I wanted to have all of the learning at my disposal to feel like I could feel secure in myself and moving through. I wanted to know how people's minds operated. I want to know their personality types. I want to know all these things, I wanted to grow myself and know how I'm wired in those ways so I know how to interface with that. And then over time, that magnet shifted for me. It shifted from wanting a leg up on other people or the competition in life and to make resource. It's now shifted over to much more of a contribution frame and then actually that was the middle point, contribution frame. Like I want to give back, I want to contribute, to create legacy, help other people. And it's actually moved even further beyond that to what you said about happiness, contentment, and joyfulness. At this point, my metric for knowing, like my magnet for knowing that I'm on the right path of personal growth is, can I be joyfully expressive and joyful in every moment of my life, every situation, no matter how bad that situation is? And doesn't mean I don't feel emotions of sadness. Like if you died, Antonia, I'd probably be very sad for a very long time. But can I be joyful in the midst of that sadness? Can I have joy and gratitude in the midst of the deep, dark sadness that would come from losing someone that I love very dearly? And if I can get to that level, to be able to be joyful in those moments, then I know that, like, that's for me, my personal metric. I know I'm on the right path. So it's been shifting for me over time. And at kind of the nature of a magnet, you triangulate toward it, right? You calibrate up to that point, and then you almost like throw it in the field further from you again. So I picked up that magnet multiple times and thrown it into the future, my future self. And right now that magnet is that joyful expression one. Maybe I'll have a different one in the next phase of my life. So I think that shifts over time. And again, the question I have from that is that because I'm a striver? I'm unsatisfied with whatever I hit. Like I did make the resource. I did learn how business works. I was successful in that area and I did understand personality types and I did have a leg up on other people and know how they're wired and how I'm wired. And then it morphed into contribution and I have given back and I continue to. None of the first magnet was ever gone. I still know all those things and I still know how to generate resource. And now I know how to give back. And the next phase is I want to be joyfully expressive in any moment. So is that shifting because I can't stop because I'm addicted to the progress of personal growth? Or is that how it works? As we achieve the one, we're just human and we want to achieve the next. And that is an interesting question to me. And it probably depends on the person, how you're wired listening. Maybe you have a difference in how you cast the thing before you. That magnet in the middle of the field may not be a good metaphor for some people. They have more of a sequential plan. 5 steps. It's not so emergent for them. It's more logical and pre-planned, and they just follow that plan and work toward it. So I think that had I gotten to the place in my life where those first 2 things, I started to contribute here at Personality Hacker, and I'm contributing and I've settled, I feel like I would get stagnant or to start to atrophy if I just settle there. I feel like if I've got something next to strive for, the thing I'm doing now is better as well. And at the same time, sometimes I find myself striving for striving's sake. Sometimes I find myself, we got to get this piece of content out for Personality Hacker. And then I go, and you even ask, well, why? Why is that so important? I'm like, well, we got to keep it all running. We have to create, we have to almost like I feel like I have to justify why we're doing any of this. And I realize there can be a lot of power in just taking a step back and just being with something rather than always striving all the time.
Yeah. I almost wonder sometimes if we don't give ourselves enough time to integrate the lessons we've learned. Because the striving, or I hate the word strive. Actually, I don't hate the word strive, but I don't know if it's the right word for this particular podcast. But I think maybe the word grind is better, actually, the grind of personal development, because it's kind of relentless, actually. I think growth and development is relentless because there is always something next that has to be addressed. But if you don't give yourself enough time to take the lessons in and really, my personal growth process, I have always seen it as climbing up a hill and then getting to a precipice and looking out over the scenery and then going, well, I'm not at the top of the hill. So you keep climbing, or the mountain, and you keep climbing, and then you get to the next ledge, right? And you're looking for the top precipice, which will never be found in our lifetime. But I think that moment when you get to the ledges and you can relax for a second and take in the territory of what you can see now that you've done a bit of the climb. I think that if you don't give yourself enough opportunity when you hit that ledge, when you need to integrate all the lessons you just learned from the climb, I don't know if you actually are doing, I don't know if you're completing your growth work, or at least for that time, that segment, whatever that segment of the growth work is. I don't know if you can feel complete in it if you haven't done true integration.
Well, there's a lot of value in keeping the devil I know going. As far as I'm concerned, if I can continue doing, if I don't integrate, then I'm still kind of in that, it never closed the loop, and maybe I can avoid opening another loop. So it's almost its own form of rest in some way, but it's rest from, it's not true rest. It's low grade rest. I don't have completed, let's say I'm working on a personal growth project, how I show up to you, for example. Maybe we've talked about this. I have a tendency in our conversations my NE gets away from me, my extroverted intuition gets away from me. Sometimes I will be conversationally, and I won't hold space for a thought you bring, because I just assume your thoughts are quickly accessible, but they're much like my emotions. They need to be validated and honored just like my emotions. So that's something I've been working on a lot in the last year or so, since it's been made aware of it. So I'm working on that, and I think I'm getting much and much better. But let's say I get close to the end of that, but I don't celebrate, close that, and go, okay, that's something I feel like I've got a skill built around developing. It could be an avoidance strategy because the next thing might be even tougher. Maybe it's something else. Oh man. So we kind of stay in this perpetual low grade churn. We don't really want to go to that precipice and camp out for the night, metaphorically speaking, and celebrate and be like, okay, we made it up that hill. Take a deep breath and go for the next one. So I think there's maybe some of that in there, at least from my experience. I don't know if everybody experiences that way.
If you're on this particular climb forever, you don't have to go the next one.
Yeah. And I think that happens probably less in achievement, because achievement's goal focused. I bet that shows up more in healing work. When we're doing personal growth around stuff we have to heal from our past, I bet we have more churn there than the achievement stuff, because achievement's I have this outcome, I want to make money, or I want to get this relationship, or I want to have this thing happen in the world. And then we set up a plan to achieve that thing. And that thing is the goal. Whereas healing, it's hard to have a metric for healing. Like I want to feel not so crappy like I feel today. Like how do you measure the success of healing from something? So when there's no measurement there, that's also somewhere we can churn, I think.
Oh, yeah. And we can also get identity around who we are with this trauma. And so I think a lot of churn lives in healing personal development work. I think sometimes we fully resist, like completely, or we resist healing from some traumas because we, like you said, the next climb looks like something that was too much for us. And so we won't fully heal from these traumas if that is on the table, if the capacity is there to fully heal, or at least mostly heal, or heal enough to be able to move on. And we know that the next thing is something, or we fear the next thing is something that's outside of our abilities. We will stay in a place where healing work is like, oh, we got to keep working on this trauma, keep working on this trauma. There's a lot of churn that happens there for sure. I also think that integration time period is tough for, like you mentioned, for healing, it's avoidant potentially, right? Like you're avoiding that moment of integration and going, this is complete and I can move on and move to the next thing. I think with achievement, the fear is that if you give yourself time to integrate, and we should probably talk about what we mean by the word integrate. But for achievement, the fear is that if you take time to integrate, you're going to lose your momentum. And if you lose your momentum, then you won't be able to keep going in achievement.
And in transcendence, if you integrate, you're not being spiritual enough. You're not being high-minded enough. You're being too pragmatic or practical, I bet.
Yeah. And but I don't think we have directly said it yet in this podcast, but what we're using right now is a model called the HAT model. It's we've done a whole podcast on it, and it references 3 different kinds of personal development, which is healing work, achievement work, and transcendence work. Healing work is anytime you need to heal from a trauma. Achievement is when you are at a baseline of health, but you're trying to get to the next level in your life in whatever capacity that is. And then transcendence is anything spiritual, but particularly spiritual work that addresses the ego. So yeah, I think you're right. I think there's reasons to avoid integration for all 3 styles of personal development. But like, what does integration look like for you? When we talk about integration, what exactly are we talking about?
For me, it's deep identity level change. Now, I'm an introverted feeling person, ENFP in the Myers-Briggs system, so I'm not sure if it applies that same way to everybody. But probably some notion of that is there as far as that goes. But like, it's identity change. So now that I know business, for example, how business works, how like marketing works, how to make money online and create digital products and events and like just the normal aspects of business, I've really integrated that into my identity, and it's changed how I see the world. I remember reading the book Think and Grow Rich, kind of thinking it's bullcrap. Like, come on, you shift your mentality and your perspective, and that's what creates wealth in your life. Give me the to-do list, Napoleon Hill. What are the 10 steps to create a business and create wealth in my life? You give me all this abstract, esoteric stuff. But now that I've created some success, and there's more to create, but I've created the beginnings of some success in the money-making side of things, man, was Napoleon Hill right. Like, I look back and I'm like, it really was my mindsets that created the difference for me. Like, and I've had the experience of like sleeping on you and I in like not that long ago in the early days of Personality Hacker, like being on government assistance and not having any money to our name and stressing out about how I was going to pay child support every month and getting behind on bills and having a very difficult time of it for years.
Sleeping on a mattress we found in the attic.
Yeah, we were renting this place and we found this like attic this mattress in the attic, and we just kind of covered it with a mattress cover and vacuumed as much as we could and slept on the floor with our clothes without dressers, just stacked around the apartment we were renting very cheaply, kind of in this hole in the wall in a small town in Pennsylvania for very low rates. So like, I've integrated the mindset that it takes to think successfully and be successful. Like, I've integrated that deep identity level change. So that's the integration piece. Like, it's part of who I am now. It's not a to-do list I do. It's who I am and how I see the world. And what's weird is when that shift happened, I feel complete in that. Now, there's always something I can learn around business or creating wealth and all that. But a lot of the insecurity or a lot of the frustrations or the struggle there on that side, it's so much more clear to me now because it's just part of my experience. It's something that I can just see so clearly. But I had to go through it and experience it to integrate it into my identity. So I identify integration as deep identity level change around whatever it is I've been working on from the inside of me, and then the behavior then, or the change, emerges from me. I don't try to project it onto myself.
Yeah.
So the conversations where I'm not quote unquote holding space for your introverted thinking ideas, I will know when it's part of my wiring, like part of my internal framework, to not only just honor the ideas you bring, but any other introverted thinking people or people that bring ideas to the table, like as their gifts. I'll know when that is just something that I just instinctively know how to like hold space for without even thinking about it anymore. Like right now I have to be conscious about it. And we've talked about the competency model as well. So maybe it's unconscious competency and full identity level integration. That's how I identify integration. How would you identify it as more of an NT type?
Yeah, no, I would identify it very similarly, which is that you've integrated it into your identity. It's now part of just how you operate and see. And I think integration time that means I'm not actively working on it. I'm just basically thinking about it. I'm understanding, I'm giving myself some rest actually from it. I do as much as I can, and then I give myself a break. And during the break time is when I feel like I do most of my integration. It's kind of like, it's like when you're working out, it's actually when you're sleeping that your muscles are repairing themselves, that you get stronger. And so, because you're tearing your muscles when you're doing, say, resistance training or, lifting weights. So your muscles tear when you're weightlifting, but when you sleep, that's when the repairs happen. And so your muscles are stronger the next time. So if you don't get enough sleep, if you're a weightlifter and you don't get enough sleep, you actually aren't getting much stronger because you're not giving your body full time to heal itself, to become stronger in the healing process. And I kind of feel like that's what integration is for me. When I'm doing personal development and personal growth, if I've got a project, I'm actively trying to do the things that will facilitate that. But I have to have some rest time. I have to have some downtime when I'm just thinking about it. And I'm just sort of mulling it over and giving myself a lot of space. And usually that means it doesn't look like much from the outside world. But I feel like that's when I'm getting stronger. I feel like that's when actually everything's sort of internally repairing itself so that the next time I go out, I'm capable of, sort of showing up better. And I feel like integration time is almost always rest time. Is that the same for you?
I would totally resonate with that, yes. And I liked what you said. I can feel, I don't know if you said I feel or I can sense myself getting stronger, or that's when I get stronger. And as I'm reflecting on the times I've stopped and I've let the learning sink in, or the experiences sink in, it is interesting how at the end of that, even without doing much, I feel different at the end of it. It might be a week, 2 weeks, whatever. That integration period really does wire things differently in my heart and mind. I want to paint a hypothetical situation here. And maybe you listening would identify with this. Somebody that's into personal growth, they've been growing, working on themselves, maybe listen to our podcast, other personal growth podcasts. They've really focused in on, they've got every Tony Robbins book. They've got every law of attraction thing. They've done it all. They've practiced every possible system. They know type. They're really into it. Their life's going well. They have a career they love or a business they love. They have a relationship they like. They got kids that they are cool with, and their family. Obviously we have challenges, but life's pretty good, pretty stable. And then there's all this sudden this insecurity or this feeling of like, man, I need to be working on something. I have all this personal growth knowledge, all this skill and experience built around working on something. Maybe it's my relationship there's a problem with. I bet you it's my relationship. And then they start to look for problems, maybe when they aren't really there, or the minutia of it becomes a problem. Like all of a sudden, this thing that you were totally cool with when you were working on something else in your life now becomes a major issue in your relationship because, quite frankly, you're just bored. Like you don't have anything to work on, and you feel compelled because you've had to strive so far to get to where you are, healing yourself, achieving maybe success, having a spiritual connection. Like you've worked so hard on all these things. It's like, well, your identity gets wrapped up in the process to the degree where you're like, who am I if I'm not doing these things? So there's got to be something wrong with my relationship, or there's got to be something wrong with one of my kids, or there's got to be something wrong with my career or business where I'm not doing enough, or like it's just constant pressure. And certainly our society doesn't help either because it's the messages we're never good enough. So how do we, my guess is there's somebody listening right now that has this experience. I think I've gone through periods of time when I've looked for problems just because I'm wired to be a problem solver and I want to fix stuff and I want to continue to grow. Or I'm almost like an immune system that doesn't have disease to work on. So I like start attacking the body and I create an allergy for myself or something, metaphorically speaking. Again, I don't know if that's how it works in the real medical community, but there's been some hypothesis that the reason we have allergies today is because we're too clean. Like we have antibacterial soaps and like everybody's super antibacterial. So our body immune systems are like, well, we got to fight something. Let's create a peanut allergy for ourselves. Again, I don't know if that's medically accurate, but the metaphor holds up because I think that might be something we're doing in personal growth is we don't actually have something to work on. So our relationship, our children, our career becomes an allergy that we attack thinking that that's something we have to actually fix or address in our lives.
Yeah. Well, I think there's something to be said for that. I think that sometimes in personal growth, we do create allergies. And not to say that there's not always something to be working on. But as we mentioned before, that integration time period, which isn't doing much of anything. And usually, I think during integration, most of us need some serious space. We need quiet time. We maybe need some reflective time. We need some journaling time. We need some time where, maybe we're getting away and we have like a couple days to ourselves, or we go do a meditation retreat, or like there's something where we just we don't have to be in the grind of it every moment. And then when we have that space and our minds and bodies sort of reset to this new norm, to figuring out these things and really integrating them as part of our identity, I think that, I think there is a tendency to almost immediately go into a time period of like, okay, what's next? What do we got to work on next? I don't think there's anything wrong with giving yourself some rest time after that. Like, I'm assuming that when people do physical competitions, people go to the Olympics, or maybe bodybuilders that go to weightlifting championships or whatever. I'm assuming that after you do a big, meet, you probably give yourself a little bit of chill after that, especially if you won. Like if you actually did the thing you set out to accomplish, you give yourself a little bit of rest time because everybody needs rest. I think this idea that you have to perpetually be looking for the next thing and that your sort of your personal development immune system will go find something to work on, I think it means that you've lost sight of why you were doing it to begin with. It's almost like the process has taken over. You're obsessed with the process. Process is important. We talk about process all the time. But when you're focused on the process and obsessed with it and it's taken over you, that's when it turns into an immune system that's constantly looking for something to attack.
I wonder if this is actually a challenge with most people in growth. I think, so I want to go back to the hat model again, because I think that this probably is more of a challenge for people focused on the achievement aspect of hat. I'm almost positive like the healing people probably have their own, like people that are more, the heavier work needs to be done, the healing probably gets stuck in being attached to that identity of who am I if I let this thing go? Because it gives me some sense of like empowerment. So that's probably the work they have to do. The achievement people, like I think you and I are both wired way more to achievement. Most of our products and services are personality hacker achievement focused. Like it's achievement, bettering. That's probably the grouping that gets stuck the most in this kind of a framework of continuous striving and trying to make sure we don't have allergy attacks. Transcendence side, the spiritual practice and stuff, I almost wonder if there's a mix of both there, depending on how the person's wired. But it almost seems like if you're working on spiritual practices or transcendence work or ego work, like that almost feels like you wouldn't have a problem there. But I think people get just as attached to that as anything else. Like I've had these moments in my life where it's rooting out ego. It's like so focused and fixated. I'm realizing I'm like, it's obsession of like getting past my own ego. Well, maybe just let my ego be here for a while. Like I don't need to like root it out in every aspect of every possible nuanced way. So I would think that if you're listening and you're not identifying with some of the things we're talking about where you're looking for problems or you're attempting to do that, or maybe it's you look for problems in whatever vein you're stuck in. So healing people look for more things to heal. Achievement people look for more things to achieve. Transcendent people look for more ways to be spiritual and connected and ego-driven, or not ego-driven. That's probably actually what it is more like. So it's probably what kind of thing you're looking for in your striving. I know you don't like that word. Why don't you like the word striving again?
I don't know. It just feels like every time I use it, it's the wrong word for this podcast. It's just a weird hang up that I'm having right now.
Oh, yeah. So there's nothing specific about the word.
No, it doesn't mean anything. Yeah. Well, I want to say, though, that even not being in the hat model and getting outside of that, I think another thing is that, again, as people who are looking for meaning, we can religionize anything. We can turn anything into a religion. And part of this isn't just the people who are obsessed with personal growth and personal development. I actually think that personal development we can almost like you were trying to root out sin. We can turn growth into something that we believe that we're bad and wrong if we're not perpetually doing it. And I do think that's a trap of growth and development. I think that definitely is a trap. And then what happens on the heels of that trap is this convincing that you are doing growth, that you absolutely are. In fact, I think we did a whole podcast on that concept of people who are doing pseudo growth. So I think that there are multiple, the challenge of personal growth is that arguably it is for us to become more sort of self-satisfied in like the best way possible, to have inner calm and zen, to be able to show up to the world giving the most that we can, to be the best version of ourselves. But our ego is so insidious that it finds ways to trap us. It finds ways to sort of misdirect and take us off the path that we're supposed to be on, quote unquote. But I think one of those is by, like basically feeling like we're doing growth when we're actually being avoidant. And another one is thinking that there's somehow some virtue associated with what we're doing, which is that if we stop, we're now lacking virtue. And I think that that's actually fundamentally what I'm sort of realizing about personal growth is that there's no actual virtue here.
I totally do that though. I had assigned virtue there when it shouldn't necessarily be assigned. Like as you said that just instantly clicked.
Yeah, like we're not doing anything virtuous.
Like we're more. It's like people that are into personal growth are more moral or more virtuous as people. But I totally think I am though. Like I mean, I don't really think I am, but like unconsciously, I just watched my own motivation pop up. And I actually kind of do think I am. Like, I think I'm doing better than other people that aren't doing personal growth.
Right. And I mean, what we're doing is, there's so many positives that come from it. There really are legit positives. Like all the net positives of trying to be a better person. I have better relationships in my life. People like me more. I'm able to make more resource for my family. Like there's a lot of great things that come along with this. But at the end of the day, it's that whole concept of Sisyphus conundrum, right? Like Sisyphus was forced to push a rock up a wall every day, and it rolled down the hill at the end of the day, and then he went back down to the bottom of the hill, and the next day he pushed the rock back up, the hill, or the boulder, and it's like, so what is the narrative or story Sisyphus is going to give to pushing this boulder up a hill? Because he's going to be doing it for eternity, so he might as well turn it into a game, right? He might as well turn it into something fun or interesting so he doesn't go mad. And that's kind of what we're doing. Personal growth is the game that we've assigned to the boulder. And there's a lot of positives that come from it, and there are much, much worse games that people can be playing. Like there are way worse narratives that people can apply to the boulder that they're pushing up the hill. But if we're being honest with ourselves, unless there's like a voice from on high that says that personal development is a virtue, there's really nothing to say that it is virtuous. It's just the game that we want to play because it makes us feel better and makes other people feel better. And I think this concept of never giving yourself a moment to rest, never giving yourself a moment to integrate and celebrate the positives that are coming from it. Why is this the boulder you're pushing up the hill then? Like there's nothing that's like you're not buying yourself into, there's tons of religions and none of the religions actually say that personal growth is the way you buy your way into heaven. It's like, it's by worshiping the right God and by, doing all the things that God requires of you.
Animal sacrifice.
Yeah, some
obscure religion, I'm sure, somewhere.
That's right. Some of it's animal sacrifice. Other is just, saying the Lord's Prayer. There's a lot of different varieties, but personal development is never one of them. Becoming more Christ-like or listening to the Buddha or there's lots of different variations in there. But, even if you're going to talk about like the West, the most predominant Western religion of Christianity, he said, chill out, but he didn't give like a 12-step process for growth and development. So you don't really have to even be that great of a person and you're still forgiven according to most Christian religions. So at the end of the day, there's no virtue here. It's just what we're doing. It's just the story we're applying to the boulder. So if you're going to do that, let yourself have a break every once in a while. It's going to be okay. Give yourself some time and space to integrate. Don't get too obsessed with the process. The process isn't going to do jack unless you give yourself rest time anyway. So don't lose sight of why you got into the game to begin with. Don't lose sight of why you started to tell this narrative as you were pushing the boulder up the hill. It's because you want the gifts that come from it. And the gifts don't come from it if you get too obsessed with the process. If you're looking for problems in your life to eradicate. If you're making yourself miserable by doing that, if you're looking for reasons why your spouse is not what they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and your partner isn't the right partner, or because like your partner needs to be doing this thing and you need to go tell them, or you need to be more of this for your partner. It's like, I don't know. Can you guys just like take a night off and just maybe go have like a nice meal or something? Like, it doesn't always have to be this constant, struggle. Struggle is the word I'm looking for, not striving. It doesn't have to be a constant struggle. And give yourself a day off every once in a while from personal growth and development if that happens to be a trap you're in.
Some of my favorite integration tools: getting alone, journaling, reflecting, gratitude, moments of gratitude. Like, I'll have these moments when I'm like sitting around like the dinner table with our family, like all three of my children, your stepkids, our daughter together, maybe some friends. And I'll just take a moment. This happened at our event too. I'll just take a moment, look out over everything and just be like, I'm just massively grateful for my station of life, where I'm at, all the challenges I've been through to get me to this place. When there's been a lot of pain, a lot of difficulty. I mean, I have a lot of blessings and benefits and privilege too, but it's also come with its own pain and difficulty. Everybody has their own personal story, but those have been some of my best integrative moments. That gratitude, it's like celebratory gratitude. It's like placing it on just the emergent that is, not like necessarily look how amazing I am, but sometimes it is being grateful for the amazingness that I've brought out of myself, which is cool too. So those have been some of my really powerful integration moments. Journaling and really reflecting on how I've shifted, like looking back through my journals over the last several years and watching some of the concerns I had, the personal growth concerns or the worries or the stresses 3 years ago or even a year ago, and then going, why was I worried about that? And then journaling about the changes that I've made since then and watching. Now, this is a very NESI way of doing it, right? Looking at the changes over time and finding the patterns in them. Again, this is a lot of what I'm saying is personal to my personality as an ENFP, but each of us probably have integration tools at our disposal. I'm guessing you have some of those as well.
Yeah, totally. I think it's cute that every time you say disposal, you say disposable.
I think I'm tired. My words have not been coming to me as clearly. I have to slow down and articulate better.
This is like the second or third times I don't know how many times.
I'm just drinking water, I promise.
But I think it's adorable. For me, I actually like to get as far away from everybody else rest as possible. So I actually do integration while playing video games. I don't give myself a lot of video game time because our life is too hectic and chaotic for that. But I'll set aside a day, maybe every few months, where that is my video game day. And I just sit there like a bump on a log and play video games all day. And actually, I don't know what it is, but at the end of the day, it's like I figure a whole bunch of stuff out. And I think though, if I was going to be like, sounding spiritual as hell, the thing that I would say is sensory deprivation tanks. Man alive, 90 minutes in a sensory deprivation tank is not long enough. Like, I have to do 2+ hours.
I bet INJs would love, well, any NJ would probably love a sensory deprivation tank.
I used to say it was like an NISE or introverted intuition, extroverted sensing thing, but my God, I love them so much. I think it's a human thing. Sensory deprivation tanks are such a massive tool for integration for me. It's delightful.
If you've never been in one, basically it's like salt water, warm salt water, and you strip down, usually naked, and you get into this, it's like a closed closet thing, and you lay on it, and the salt water suspends you, and then it's completely quiet. The lights are off. It's pitch black, and the salt water actually covers your ears. You can't hear anything. You're floating, so you can't feel anything. You don't have any clothing on, so you're kind of just suspended in this liquid. And you literally, your senses are turned off. And I mean, as much as they can be in that environment. So you can't really do much with your senses. You're just in an internal space, and it's really a powerful experience. Yeah,
it's incredible. I've also done ones where they'll do like little starlights at the top or some things like that. But for the most part, you're totally closed off, and it's amazing. And you'd think that 90 minutes would be a long time, but the last time I did it, it felt like 15 minutes, and I was like, it's not long enough. So self-care, I think that this is where self-care comes in. Like we go on and on about self-care a lot of times, particularly with FJ types, but I think all types need to do a lot of self-care. And one of the things about self-care and personal development is like cutting yourself some slack, just taking a break. It's okay. It's all right. The personal development will be there for you when you get back. And just give yourself a little bit of space and re-ask yourself the question of why you're doing it to begin with. Like, are you doing it legit to have inner zen, inner peace, to be the best version of yourself? Or are you doing it because you're actually avoiding something? And this is the story that you think is going to get you closer to virtue. Like, go inside yourself, try to figure out your intent, your motivation a little bit. And if it's honestly because you want to be a better version of yourself, then maybe let go of it a little bit for a couple days, and then, it'll be there waiting for you when you come back.
What do you think? You've been here listening to us. What are your thoughts? What are your questions, comments? We want you to share your story over at personalityhacker.com directly below this podcast. We'd love to hear how this concept of growth shows up in your life, and then the respite or the rest to integrate. And how do you manage those two things? Do you tend to focus on the growth side more, or the rest side, integration side? Are you more in the healing aspect of personal growth? Are you achievement? Are you focused more on transcendence? Where have those tripped you up? Which one do you avoid? Some people that are into healing just avoid, achievement altogether because it's just too much for them. Or people that are in achievement won't go back and heal past traumas. So where are you at in those, and how is that showing up for your growth movement forward, and then your stops to integrate? Growth movement forward, stops to integrate. We'd love to hear from you. Personalityhacker.com. Come make your comments, ask your questions, and leave your story.
Yeah, if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. Check us out on social media, all the standard social media platforms, and also go buy a copy of our book. We would be very, very, very grateful if you would go check us out at Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes & Noble, et al. Also, I haven't said this in a long time, but just as a reminder, you can leave a rating and review for us at iTunes. That definitely helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker Podcast.